The Haunted Bedroom. Hello friends, welcome to the Horror Ghost Stories. The story begins. It was a cold, moonless night when Emma and her friends, desperate for adventure, stumbled upon an old, decrepit house at the edge of town. The house had been abandoned for years, yet it still loomed tall and imposing, with its rotting wooden planks and shattered windows. But the room that called to them, the bedroom on the second floor, was said to be cursed, a place where strange things happened. They heard the rumors, whispers of the supernatural forces that haunted the house. But Emma, skeptical as always, pushed those thoughts aside. She led her friends up the creaky staircase, the floorboards groaning beneath their weight. As they reached the top, the door to the bedroom creaked open on its own, as though welcoming them inside. The room was freezing, colder than the rest of the house, despite the lack of windows or any other obvious source of the chill. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were watching. A large, dust-covered mirror hung on one wall, its surface cracked but still reflecting the dim light from their flashlights. As they stepped further in, Emma noticed an old wooden rocking chair in the corner, its back slightly tilted as if someone had just left it. She shivered but brushed it off as her imagination running wild. Her friends, though, were uneasy, eyes darting around as they whispered about the eerie presence they all felt. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound the occasional creak of the house. But then, out of nowhere, the door slammed shut behind them with a force that shook the room. Emma jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. They tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped. Suddenly, the air grew colder still. A strange, hollow voice echoed through the room, faint but unmistakable. "Leave. Before it's too late." The words seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she scanned the room. No one else was there. But she wasn't alone. They all felt it, a presence that had been lingering, watching them, waiting for them. They turned their attention back to the rocking chair, which now moved on its own, rocking slowly back and forth, creaking with every motion. The mirror flickered, distorting the reflections like a ripple in water. Emma's friends began to cry out, calling for the door to open, but the voice returned, louder this time, "Leave. Now." Emma's heart raced as the temperature in the room dropped even further. She could see her breath in the air, and the room seemed to close in around them. Shadows danced along the walls, flickering like dark, twisted figures. Each shadow seemed to stretch toward them, as if the darkness itself were coming alive. Then, without warning, the mirror shattered. Glass rained down, scattering across the floor. Emma screamed, covering her face as shards of glass flew past her, but when she looked up, the reflection in the mirror had changed. Instead of the room behind her, she saw a dark, endless void nothingness stretching out into eternity. A hand, pale and skeletal, reached out from the depths of the mirror, its fingers curling as it grasped at the air. Her friends screamed, scrambling toward the door, trying to break free. But it was too late. The room seemed to grow larger, the shadows swallowing everything. They were no longer in the house but in some otherworldly space, a place where the laws of reality had no meaning. The air was thick with dread, and the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Emma looked at her friends, each of them now frozen in place, their eyes wide with terror. One by one, they began to disappear, vanishing into thin air, their screams echoing in the empty space. Emma was the last to remain, her heart racing, her breath coming in short gasps. The darkness closed in around her, suffocating her, and she felt herself being pulled toward the void. Just as she thought she would be consumed by the darkness, the door to the room suddenly flew open. Emma didn't hesitate, she ran, desperate to escape. She tore down the stairs, through the house, and out into the night air. But when she turned around to look back, the house was gone. In its place was a vast, empty field, the only sound the wind whispering through the grass. She never spoke of what happened that night, but she could never forget the feeling of the darkness reaching for her, waiting. And every now and then, when the wind howls through the night, Emma and her friends ventured into the abandoned house. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the eerie reputation of the house, it was the air itself, heavy, thick with a sense of something ancient and malevolent. As they made their way inside, the rotting wood groaned underfoot, as if protesting their intrusion. They gathered in the entryway, the house cold and silent, with dust coating every surface like a thick veil. The air smelled faintly of mildew and decay. The flickering light from their flashlights cast strange, angular shadows on the walls, amplifying their unease. Emma took a deep breath, forcing her nerves into calmness, convinced it was just her imagination. But the others were less certain. Ben, usually the brave one in the group, whispered, "We shouldn't be here. There's something wrong with this place." Emma laughed it off. "It's just an old house, Ben. We're not going to let some stories scare us." But even she could feel a chill creeping up her spine, a sensation she couldn't explain. As they ascended the staircase, the house seemed to shift, creaking and groaning, as if it were waking up, sensing their presence. The bedroom door, which had been ajar when they first arrived, was now completely open. The room beckoned them like a dark void, its presence palpable in the silence that surrounded them. Emma was the first to step inside. The air in the room was unnaturally cold, and the moment she crossed the threshold, she felt a wave of discomfort wash over her. Her friends followed hesitantly, their footsteps soft on the dusty floor. The bed, covered in a tattered quilt, sat in the center of the room. An old rocking chair, worn from years of use, creaked faintly in the corner. A small, cracked mirror hung crookedly on the wall, reflecting the dim, flickering light from their flashlights. Everything about the room felt wrong. The shadows seemed to twist unnaturally, like they were alive, waiting to pounce. They tried to ignore the overwhelming sense of dread that filled the space. Ben whispered, "Let's just look around and get out. I don't like this place." But before anyone could respond, the door slammed shut behind them with an almost deafening bang. The sound echoed through the room, sending a ripple of panic through the group. They rushed to the door, desperately trying to open it, but it refused to budge, as though it were sealed shut by an unseen force. "What the hell, Sarah?" one of Emma's friends shouted. Her voice trembled with fear. Emma yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't move. The room, once just cold, now felt suffocating, as though the walls were closing in. Her breath came in short gasps as the oppressive atmosphere thickened. Then, out of nowhere, they heard a voice. It was faint at first, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Leave. Before it's too late." The words sent a chill straight to Emma's core. Her heart began to race. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her friends nodded, wide-eyed. "What was that?" Ben asked, his voice cracking. Emma turned toward the rocking chair. It had started moving, slowly, almost as if an invisible hand were rocking it. The sound was soft at first, but it grew louder, creaking in the silence of the room. Emma's flashlight flickered, and when it came back on, the room appeared different. The shadows were darker, more pronounced. And the mirror, it seemed to warp, the reflection in it distorting in unsettling ways. She could no longer see the room behind her. Instead, there was something dark, a void, an endless abyss stretching into the distance. And then the voice returned, this time much louder, echoing in their minds. Leave now. Or you will never leave. Panic set in as they tried once more to open the door, but it was no use. The handle wouldn't move, as if it were held shut by something far stronger than their hands. The room seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, the temperature dropping rapidly. Emma could see her breath forming in the icy air, the frost creeping along the walls like a spreading disease. The rocking chair now moved violently, the creaking loud enough to drown out their voices. They backed away from it, but the shadows seemed to follow, twisting along the floor and walls, reaching for them. Emma turned to look at the mirror again. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. The mirror was a window into something far darker, an abyss that beckoned with an inescapable pull. Then, everything changed. The mirror shattered, the glass exploding outward in a shower of shards. Emma screamed, instinctively shielding her face as pieces of glass flew past her, embedding themselves in the walls. The room, already so cold, felt like an icebox. Her heart hammered in her chest. She glanced at her friends, but they looked as if they were frozen in place, their eyes wide with terror. And that's when Emma saw it through the jagged remains of the mirror, something was reaching out. A hand, pale and skeletal, with fingers that seemed to stretch unnaturally long, reached toward them. The fingers curled, beckoning her, as if it wanted to pull her into the void beyond the glass. Emma, run! Sarah screamed, but the words barely registered in Emma's ears as she felt the pull of the darkness. Her body refused to obey her mind's command. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the mirror. The darkness from the shattered mirror started to spill out into the room, creeping across the floor like a living thing. Emma's friends scrambled toward the door, but one by one, they vanished. Ben was the first to disappear, his form swallowed by the inky blackness that poured from the mirror. Sarah screamed in terror as she too was engulfed, her body yanked into the darkness, her cries echoing in Emma's ears as she too was consumed by the void. Emma was alone now, the shadows closing in around her. The room itself seemed to breathe, exhaling a cold, suffocating air that made her choke. Every step she tried to take, the darkness pressed in harder. She could feel the presence of someone just beyond her reach. A cold hand brushed her shoulder, and she spun around, but no one was there. With everything she had left, Emma sprinted for the door. She threw herself against it, slamming her shoulder into the wood with all her strength. The door gave way, creaking open just enough for her to slip through. She ran down the stairs, not looking back, her heart pounding in her chest. The air outside was warm in comparison, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling of the shadows chasing her, following her. She didn't stop running until she reached the edge of the property. But when she turned around to look back at the house, it was gone. In its place was an empty field, the grass swaying gently in the wind. The house had vanished, as though it had never existed. Emma collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. Though she left the house behind, Emma knew it wasn't truly gone. Every night, in the stillness of her room, she would hear the voice again, faint but unmistakable. Leave. Before it's too late. And Emma knew, deep down, that the darkness had not forgotten her. The end.